In the Galactic year 4379, the Union of Superior Species, USS, a conglomerate of the most advanced and dominant species in the galaxy, had grown complacent in their perception of strength. To them, Earth's inhabitants were little more than a peculiar curiosity. Humans were frail compared to the battle-hardened Icthari or the crystalline Xantrix, whose bodies were naturally impervious to energy weapons. What humans had in ingenuity and adaptability, the USS dismissed as irrelevant, mere evolutionary quirks of a primitive race. But that perception was about to change. Deep within the USS research station Zeta-12, orbiting a dying star, a secret experiment was underway. A team of geneticists, cyberneticists, and xenopsychologists had convened with one singular goal: test the limits of human physiology and behavior. Their directive was simple yet sinister: break them. What would it take for a human to crumble under pressure? To submit? To lose the fire of resistance? Dr. Vetra, a Xantrix whose translucent, glowing body made her appear almost angelic, oversaw the project with cold precision. Their so-called resilience is nothing but a series of random evolutionary accidents, she declared to her team. We will dismantle the myth of human tenacity. A human subject had been carefully selected, a man named Daniel Carter. 32 years old, a soldier-turned-engineer with no significant accolades, plucked from a remote mining colony on Titan. To the USS, he was average in every conceivable way, and that was the point. If they could break the average human, they could cement their narrative that humans were inconsequential. Daniel awoke to find himself strapped to a sterile examination table, surrounded by an amalgamation of alien forms. The Xantrix shimmered with an eerie luminescence, their crystalline faces unreadable. The reptilian Icthari loomed in the shadows, their hulking forms exuding menace. A wiry Zelker, whose insectoid features twitched with barely contained glee, jabbed at a console with its spindly appendages. "Welcome, Subject 1173, Dr. Vetra said, her voice smooth but devoid of warmth. You will assist us in understanding your species. Comply, and this will be painless. Resist, and, well, the outcome will be educational nonetheless." Daniel's mind raced. His training kicked in: assess, adapt, survive. "I didn't volunteer for this," he growled, testing the restraints. "Volunteering is irrelevant," Vetra replied dismissively. "We've chosen you for your statistical mediocrity. Let's begin." The first tests were physical. The USS scientists subjected Daniel to extreme gravitational pressures, temperatures that could freeze or boil most lifeforms, and a series of toxins designed to paralyze or disorient. Each time, Daniel endured. He gritted his teeth, pushing his body to its limits. To his captors' surprise, he not only survived but adapted faster than their models predicted. Frustrated, Vetra escalated the trials. Psychological torment came next. They simulated scenarios designed to evoke fear and despair, visions of Earth consumed by fire, the faces of loved ones crying out for help, and looping auditory assaults of failure and loss. Yet Daniel held firm. His memories of his family, his comrades, and the indomitable human spirit anchored him. On the fifth day, cracks began to form, not in Daniel, but in the scientists' assumptions. "He shouldn't be able to withstand this," muttered Crix, the Zelker, as his antennae twitched in agitation. "Our models suggest mental collapse should occur by now." "Recalibrate the parameters," Vetra ordered. "This is merely an outlier." But in their pursuit of precision, the USS scientists overlooked one critical element: humanity's unpredictability. By the seventh day, Daniel had begun to observe his captors. He noticed the slight delay in the Xantrix's reactions when overexposed to ultraviolet light, the Icthari's reliance on predictable, brute force tactics, and the Zelker's overconfidence in technology. He wasn't just surviving, he was learning. That night, as the lab fell into its artificial twilight, Daniel whispered to himself, "They think we're weak because we don't have claws or armor. They don't understand what real strength is." Unbeknownst to his captors, Daniel had already begun working on an escape plan. The experiment wasn't going as planned, not for the USS. To them, it was a controlled study. To Daniel, it was war. By the 8th day, the USS scientists were growing restless. Their experiment, designed to deconstruct and expose the frailty of the human spirit, was spiraling into uncharted territory. Daniel Carter, the subject they deemed average, had become a problem they couldn't explain. He wasn't just enduring, he was adapting. In a sterile conference chamber, Dr. Vetra addressed her team. The Xantrix scientist's crystalline form pulsed with dim light, reflecting her frustration. "This is a statistical anomaly," she insisted, though her voice betrayed doubt. "The parameters must be flawed. Adjust the intensity." "Intensity isn't the issue," rumbled Tarvik, the Icthari warrior overseeing the physical trials. His scaled form loomed over the table as he jabbed a claw at the holographic display of Daniel's vitals. "His physiological resilience exceeds our projections. I say we test him with direct combat." "Combat is primitive," Vetra snapped, her luminescence flaring. "This is a controlled study, not an arena." "Primitive to you," Tarvik growled, his fangs bared. "But it reveals truths no simulation can." "Enough," Vetra interjected, turning her glowing gaze toward Crix, the Zelker technician. "What's the status of the neural inhibitor?" Crix's insectoid features twitched nervously. "Operational, but limited. His brain patterns are erratic. The inhibitor can only suppress a fraction of his neural activity. It's as though his mind compensates faster than we can interfere." "Then recalibrate it," Vetra snapped, slamming a crystalline hand against the table. Meanwhile, in his containment cell, Daniel lay on the cold metallic surface, pretending to sleep. He had spent the last 2 days analyzing his environment, the patterns of the lights, the timing of guard rotations, the subtle shifts in temperature. Every detail was a potential tool. The restraints they used were strong but not invincible. Daniel had tested their limits during the physical trials, noting where the alloy strained under pressure. He also observed the Xantrix's reliance on automated systems. The guards rarely interacted with him directly, preferring the sterile detachment of technology. That was their weakness. Daniel opened his eyes, his resolve sharpening. "They think they've already won," he muttered under his breath. "That's their first mistake." The 9th day marked a significant escalation. Daniel was strapped to a rotating platform surrounded by robotic arms equipped with syringes and probes. The scientists had decided to bypass his physical resilience and target his biology directly. A cocktail of compounds designed to disorient and destabilize was injected into his bloodstream. "You will answer our questions," Vetra said through the intercom. Her voice was clinical, devoid of empathy. "How does your species withstand psychological trauma? What evolutionary factors account for your resistance?" Daniel gritted his teeth against the searing pain coursing through his veins. His mind swam, but he forced himself to focus. He had to stay sharp. "You think strength comes from your tech," he growled, his voice hoarse but defiant. "You're missing the point." Vetra leaned forward, intrigued. "Enlighten us." Daniel smirked through the pain. "Strength isn't in the body. It's in the will." The scientists exchanged puzzled glances. "Will?" To the USS, strength was measurable: muscle density, energy thresholds, neural pathways. The abstract concept of willpower was irrelevant, or so they believed. "Meaningless platitudes," Vetra muttered, gesturing for the next phase to begin. But as the probes closed in, Daniel acted. His time in the cell had been more than passive observation. He had subtly strained the wrist restraints during every trial, weakening them. With a sudden burst of effort, he snapped the weakened bands. Alarms blared as the automated system struggled to react to the unexpected breach. Daniel moved with calculated precision, grabbing the nearest probe and using it to short-circuit the platform's restraints. He rolled off the platform just as an energy pulse crackled where he had been moments before. "Contain him!" Vetra shouted into the comms, her crystalline form flickering with urgency. But containment wasn't so simple. Daniel had studied his captor's weaknesses. The Xantrix relied on automation, the Icthari on brute force, and the Zelker on overcomplicated technology. Against a human mind driven by survival and fueled by determination, they were woefully unprepared. Daniel ducked and weaved through the sterile corridors, using his captor's own tools against them. He hacked into a control panel with the knowledge he had gleaned from observing Crix's fumbling work, locking down sections of the station to buy himself time. When a squad of Icthory soldiers cornered him, he fought with a ferocity that surprised even himself. Though smaller and weaker, Daniel exploited their predictable tactics, using their momentum against them in a desperate, yet effective, counteroffensive. By the time he reached an emergency access hatch, Daniel was bruised, bloodied, but alive. He paused, staring out at the vast expanse of space. This wasn't just about survival anymore. They had underestimated him, and by extension, all of humanity. He would ensure they never made that mistake again. As he climbed into the hatch and disappeared into the depths of the station, an unsettling thought gnawed at Dr. Vetra. What if humanity wasn't just resilient? What if they were something far more dangerous? Deep within the labyrinth of Research Station Zeta-12, Daniel Carter pressed himself against the cold wall of a ventilation shaft. His body ached, bruised from combat and strained from days of unrelenting trials. Yet his mind remained sharp, fueled by adrenaline and the knowledge that escape wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. His captors had underestimated him, and that mistake would cost them dearly. In the control room, Dr. Vetra's crystalline body pulsed erratically, an outward display of her agitation. Alarms blared as holographic displays showed red zones spreading across the station's schematics. Daniel had sealed off key sections, rerouted power, and created chaos in systems designed for precision and control. "This isn't possible," Vetra hissed, her voice tinged with disbelief. "He has no access to our systems, no understanding of our technology." Crix hunched over a console, his 6 limbs twitching in frantic synchronization. "He's using their technology," the Zelker technician stammered. "Primitive tools. He's bypassing our firewalls by manipulating physical interfaces, switches, junctions, and—" "Stop explaining and shut him down," Vetra snapped. Tarvik, the Icthory warrior, stood silently, his yellow eyes fixed on the screen. He had observed Daniel's escape with an emotion foreign to his species, respect. "Perhaps we have misjudged him," Tarvik rumbled, his deep voice cutting through the tension. Vetra turned sharply. "You think this is admirable?" "I think," Tarvik said, his tone deliberate, "that we are witnessing the true strength of his kind." Daniel crept through the station, pausing at a junction to assess his surroundings. The ventilation system had brought him near the station's power core, a critical vulnerability. The USS might have built their station to withstand external attacks, but they hadn't planned for an internal threat. Certainly not from a statistically mediocre human. His plan wasn't flawless, but it didn't need to be. Disrupt the core, overload the systems, and use the chaos to commandeer an escape pod. Simple in concept, but execution would require precision and timing. As he approached a maintenance terminal, Daniel noticed a shadow moving in the corridor. He ducked behind a column just as an Icthory patrol passed by. The reptilian soldiers communicated in guttural growls, their sharp claws tapping against the floor. He waited until they moved out of sight, then accessed the terminal. The interface was alien, but Daniel's experience as an engineer helped him decipher the basics. He smiled grimly as he initiated an override command, redirecting auxiliary power away from the security systems. "Let's see how you handle a little darkness," he muttered. Across the station, lights flickered and died. Automated defenses faltered, and the eerie hum of energy fields faded into silence. In the control room, Crix's frantic movements became almost manic. "He's rerouting power. Core integrity is dropping by 12%, wait, no, 15%. Find him." Vetra's voice rose in pitch, an unnatural sharpness to her crystalline tones. "Activate the drones." "Drones are offline," Crix replied, his antennae twitching wildly. He severed their connection to the mainframe. Tarvik's eyes gleamed with a predatory glint. "Then send me." If he wants to fight, let us see how strong he truly is. Daniel reached the power core, a massive chamber pulsating with energy. He stood for a moment, marveling at the sheer scale of the technology. Despite its advanced design, he recognized patterns, conduits, stabilizers, and redundant fail-safes. Every system, no matter how advanced, had a breaking point. He began planting makeshift explosives, scavenged from supplies he'd acquired along the way. It wasn't elegant, but it didn't need to be. All it had to do was work. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind him. Daniel spun around to see Tarvik enter the chamber, his massive frame blocking the only exit. "You've proven yourself resourceful," the Icthari said, his guttural voice reverberating through the room. "But this is where it ends." Daniel clenched his fists, his heart pounding. "Funny. I was just thinking the same thing." Tarvik charged, his claws slicing through the air. Daniel dodged, barely avoiding the strike, and retaliated by using a loose pipe as an improvised weapon. It struck Tarvik's arm, but the Icthari barely flinched. "You fight well for a weaker species," Tarvik growled, swinging again. This time, Daniel ducked and rolled, keeping his movements unpredictable. "I'm not fighting you to win," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the strain. "I'm fighting to buy time." Before Tarvik could respond, Daniel activated the explosives timer. The beeping sound filled the chamber. The Icthari's eyes widened. "You wouldn't." Daniel smirked. "Try me." He sprinted toward the exit as Tarvik roared in frustration. The Icthari tried to disarm the explosives, but the complexity of the device, a patchwork of human ingenuity, stymied him. As Daniel fled, the first explosion rocked the station, sending shockwaves through the corridors. The power core destabilized, triggering a cascade of failures. Lights flickered, alarms wailed, and the station's artificial gravity began to falter. Daniel reached an escape pod bay, where a single pod remained. He climbed inside and initiated the launch sequence. As the pod detached, he looked back at the station. Fires raged, and sections of the hull were already collapsing. The USS had underestimated humanity. They had thought resilience was a flaw to be exploited, not a strength to be feared. For Daniel, this wasn't just an escape. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The escape pod hurtled through the void, its small frame buffeted by the shockwaves of Research Station Zeta-12's demise. Daniel Carter sat strapped into the pod's cramped seat, his chest heaving from exertion. Through the viewport, he watched the station, a gleaming symbol of USS arrogance, implode in a brilliant cascade of fire and debris. For a moment, he allowed himself a grim smile. Asterisk, they thought they'd break me. They broke themselves instead, asterisk. But his relief was short-lived. The pod's navigation system beeped a warning, jolting him back to reality. The onboard AI, a rudimentary voice module, spoke in clipped, monotone galactic standard. "Alert, no pre-programmed destination. Fuel reserves critical. Trajectory, uncharted." Daniel grimaced. He had escaped the station, but now he was drifting into the vast, indifferent emptiness of space. Back in what remained of the USS control network, chaos reigned. Zeta-12's destruction rippled across the galaxy like a stone dropped into a calm pond. In the citadel of the Union of Superior Species, leaders from various member races convened in an emergency session. "We underestimated them," rumbled General Karthak, an Icthari warlord whose crimson scales glinted under the chamber's harsh lights. "This human dismantled our most secure facility." "This was not an act of strength," hissed Counselor Thalise, a Xantrix diplomat. Her translucent form pulsed with irritation. "It was desperation. A single anomaly. An anomaly that obliterated a billion-credit research station and bested some of our finest scientists and soldiers," Karthak retorted, his voice rising. "You call it an anomaly. I call it a threat." Thalise bristled but said nothing. The room fell into uneasy silence. Finally, a third voice spoke, calm yet commanding. Grand Arbiter Valoran, the enigmatic leader of the USS, stepped forward. His form was shrouded in robes that glimmered like a shifting starfield, masking his true species. Whether this human is an anomaly or a harbinger is irrelevant, Valoran intoned. What matters is the precedent. Humanity has proven it will not submit. And if one of them can achieve this, what might they accomplish as a species? The council murmured uneasily. Humanity had long been deemed inconsequential, a species of little strategic or technological value. Now, that assumption was in question. We must address this, Valoran continued. Quietly. Before they realize their potential. Drifting through the black expanse, Daniel worked tirelessly to stabilize the pod systems. He managed to reroute power to extend life support, but the fuel problem remained dire. He estimated he had less than 48 hours before the pod's reserves were exhausted. As he stared out at the endless stars, doubt crept into his mind. Was this how it ended? After everything he had survived, would he perish alone in the void? He clenched his fists. No. He refused to die a footnote in someone else's story. Using what little functionality remained in the pod, Daniel initiated a broad-spectrum distress signal. He wasn't sure who, if anyone, would pick it up. It was a gamble, but he had no other options. Hours passed. Just as Daniel was beginning to lose hope, a faint blip appeared on the pod scanner. A ship, large and moving fast, was approaching. His heart leapt, though he remained wary. The ship's design came into view, a sleek, angular vessel marked with no visible insignia. It was not USS, nor did it resemble any human craft Daniel had seen. The pod's AI confirmed the incoming hail. A voice crackled through the speakers, deep and modulated. Unidentified human, you are drifting in restricted space. State your purpose. Daniel hesitated. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Whoever these people were, they were powerful enough to operate in USS-controlled territory without fear. Were they allies, opportunists, or something worse? He pressed the comm button. This is Daniel Carter, a survivor of USS captivity. I need assistance. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Well, Mr. Carter, it seems your reputation precedes you. Prepare for docking. The ship, named Vanguard's Edge, was a marvel of engineering, sleek corridors lined with polished metals and illuminated by soft, ambient lighting. As Daniel stepped aboard, he was met by a crew that was as diverse as the galaxy itself. Humans, Icthari dissidents, rogue Xantrix, and even a Zelker engineer regarded him with a mix of curiosity and respect. At their center stood their captain, a tall human woman with sharp eyes and an air of command. She extended a hand. Daniel Carter. I'm Captain Elise Marlowe. Welcome aboard. Human? Daniel asked, stunned. Elise smirked. There's more of us out here than you think. The USS doesn't own the stars, no matter what they tell themselves. Daniel shook her hand, a sense of relief washing over him. He wasn't alone. As the Vanguard's Edge moved toward safer space, Daniel was briefed on the larger picture. The USS's arrogance and dominance had bred dissent across the galaxy. A growing resistance, composed of outcasts, rebels, and those who had suffered under USS rule, was rising. They thought humanity was weak, Elise explained. You've proven them wrong. Now, we need to show the galaxy what we're capable of. Daniel nodded, his resolve hardening. He had escaped, but this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about fighting back. The experiment had backfired, and now the USS would face the consequences. As the Vanguard's Edge sailed into the shadow of a nebula to avoid USS patrols, Daniel Carter found himself thrust into a new world, a world of rebellion and hope hidden in the vastness of space. The ship buzzed with activity as its crew of outlaws, defectors, and free thinkers prepared for their next operation. Though still a newcomer, Daniel sensed he had become more than just a guest, he was a symbol. In the ship's war room, Captain Elise Marlowe projected a holographic display of a star system. Bright dots represented USS-controlled installations, each a fortress of advanced technology and oppressive control. "We're hitting this facility next," she said, pointing to a medium-sized station orbiting an uninhabited moon. "It's a supply depot for the USS's neural inhibitors. Without it, their ability to suppress dissent weakens significantly." Daniel leaned in, studying the projection. "It's not as heavily fortified as Zeta-12, but it'll still have defenses." "What's the plan?" Elise smirked. "You're assuming we have one." The room chuckled softly, though there was a shared undercurrent of tension. Kieran, the Icthory weapons officer, stepped forward. "A frontal assault would be suicide. We'll need to disable their sensors first, then infiltrate under the guise of a transport ship." "And you expect them to just let us waltz in?" Daniel asked. Elise's smile widened. "That's where you come in." Over the next several hours, Daniel worked closely with the crew, sharing insights into the USS's tactics and weaknesses. His experiences on Zeta-12 provided crucial intelligence, especially on the neural inhibitors. The devices weren't just tools of control, they were symbols of the USS's belief in their superiority. Disrupting their production would send a powerful message. But as the crew prepared, Daniel noticed the weight of responsibility settling on him. He had sparked a fire, but now he needed to ensure it didn't burn out. For the first time, he realized this was bigger than him. Humanity's survival, and perhaps the galaxy's, depended on their success. When the Vanguard's edge arrived in the target system, it cloaked itself in the electromagnetic interference of the moon's thin atmosphere. Elise's plan was bold. The ship would approach the station disguised as a freighter delivering rare minerals, a shipment the USS would be eager to secure. Daniel stood in the bridge, clad in a USS uniform they'd scavenged from a previous mission. The fabric felt alien against his skin, but it completed the illusion. He'd be posing as a captured operative, a false narrative to get them inside. "If this doesn't work," Kieran muttered, his clawed hand resting on the control panel. "It'll work," Daniel said firmly, though the knot in his stomach told a different story. The ruse played out as planned, at first. The station's dockmaster, a haughty Xantrix officer, authorized their approach with minimal scrutiny. USS arrogance worked in their favor once again. As the ship docked, Daniel and a small team disembarked. Elise and Kieran were by his side, both posing as USS agents escorting him for interrogation. They moved quickly through the sterile corridors, their forged credentials fooling the station's automated systems. But as they reached the storage facility housing the neural inhibitors, the plan unraveled. A sharp alarm echoed through the station, followed by a metallic voice. "Unauthorized access detected. Security lockdown initiated." The team sprang into action. Elise drew her energy pistol, taking down two robotic guards that emerged from the walls. Kieran hurled himself at a USS officer, his brute strength overpowering the opponent in seconds. Daniel rushed to the control panel, bypassing the station's security protocols using the knowledge he had gleaned from his time on Zeta-12. His hands moved swiftly, overriding the inhibitor storage locks. The crates hissed open, revealing the devices that had enslaved countless minds. "We don't have much time," Daniel shouted over the chaos. Elise nodded, tossing him an explosive charge. "Then let's make this count." The team worked quickly, planting charges on the inhibitors and along the station's critical infrastructure. As they retreated to the docking bay, more USS troops poured into the corridors. The station was awake now, its defenses in full swing. Elise barked orders as they fought their way back, her precision and leadership keeping the team alive. Kieran provided cover with his massive plasma rifle, while Daniel used his knowledge of the station's layout to lead them through alternate routes. Finally, they reached the Vanguard's edge. The ship's engines roared to life as the docking clamps released. The moment they cleared the station's gravity well, Elise triggered the detonator. The explosion lit up the void, a brilliant burst that tore through the station's structure. The neural inhibitors were obliterated, and with them, a critical piece of the USS's control network. As the Vanguard's edge slipped into hyperspace, the crew gathered in the common area. There was laughter, cheers, and a sense of triumph in the air. For the first time in what felt like ages, Daniel allowed himself to relax. "You did good out there," Elise said, handing him a drink. "You're not just surviving anymore, Carter. You're fighting back." Daniel raised his glass, his expression resolute. "Here's to that. And to making sure they never see us coming." The crew cheered, their voices echoing through the ship. The battle was won, but Daniel knew the war was far from over. The USS had made a fatal mistake in underestimating humanity. Now, they would face a force they could neither predict nor control. The aftermath of the raid on the neural inhibitor station spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Though the USS tried to downplay the incident, the cracks in their ironclad facade were beginning to show. Their networks buzzed with encrypted messages, frantic orders, and veiled threats, as paranoia seeped into their ranks. For Daniel Carter and the crew of the Vanguard's Edge, the victory was exhilarating but short-lived. As the ship drifted through the calm of hyperspace, tension brewed. The crew knew retaliation was inevitable. In the war room, a smaller gathering of senior crew members and advisors reviewed the next steps. A holographic display showed a map of USS-controlled systems, pulsating with red indicators. "Intel from our informants suggests the USS is doubling security on high-value targets," said Kieran, the Icthari weapons officer. His claws tapped against the console as he highlighted key locations. "Their response will be swift and brutal." Daniel leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Good. Let them waste their resources fortifying positions we won't attack. We hit where they least expect it." Captain Elise Marlowe nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "You're catching on, Carter. It's not just about taking them down, it's about making them flinch." "Then we hit a comms relay," Daniel suggested, pointing to a system near the outer rim. "If we disrupt their long-range communications, they'll scramble to re-establish control. It'll spread confusion across their chain of command." Kieran grinned, baring his sharp teeth. "I like the way you think." The Vanguard's Edge dropped out of hyperspace near the relay station, a massive structure suspended in the void. Its sleek design radiated arrogance, a hallmark of USS construction. "Status?" Elise asked from the captain's chair. "Scans show standard defenses," said Nadia, the ship's Zelker engineer. Her multi-limbed form moved gracefully over the console. "Automated turrets, 2 patrol frigates, and a squadron of drones." "Manageable," Elise said, her voice calm. "Prepare for silent approach." Daniel joined the infiltration team, his nerves steady despite the stakes. Clad in a tactical suit, he checked his equipment, a mix of human ingenuity and alien tech scavenged from their previous missions. As the team prepared to board a stealth shuttle, Kieran slapped him on the shoulder. "Ready to make more history, human?" Daniel smirked. "History's not going to make itself." The shuttle slipped away from the Vanguard's Edge, cloaked by advanced shielding that masked its presence. As it approached the relay station, Daniel felt the familiar adrenaline surge. The docking procedure went smoothly, the team bypassing the station's outer defenses with precision. Once inside, they moved through the sterile corridors, their footsteps muffled by sound-dampening boots. Nadia led the way, her limbs working in perfect coordination as she hacked into a control panel. "We're in. Communications array is 2 levels up." The team advanced, their movements synchronized. They encountered minimal resistance. Most of the station's personnel were focused on monitoring external threats. When they reached the comms array, Daniel marveled at the sheer scale of it. Towering consoles and glowing interfaces pulsed with energy, the heartbeat of USS communication. "Let's make some noise," Elise said, setting down a satchel of explosives. Daniel and Nadia worked quickly, planting charges while the others secured the area. As they finished, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. "They're onto us," Kieran growled, readying his plasma rifle. Daniel grabbed a blaster, his muscles tensing. Then we hold them off long enough to finish the job. The firefight was fierce. USS soldiers stormed the room, their precision and discipline evident. But the crew of the Vanguard's Edge was no ordinary team. Kieran's raw power, Elise's unerring aim, and Daniel's adaptability turned the tide. Despite the chaos, Daniel felt an odd clarity. His movements were fluid, his shots precise. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. When the charges were armed, Elise called out, "Time to go." The team retreated, navigating the station's labyrinthine corridors. USS reinforcements pursued them relentlessly, but Daniel's knowledge of their tactics gave them the edge. Back on the shuttle, the team watched as the relay station detonated in a spectacular burst of light and debris. The USS's comms network flickered and faltered, leaving a void that would take weeks to repair. As the shuttle rejoined the Vanguard's Edge, cheers erupted among the crew. But Daniel's mind was elsewhere. "This won't be the end of it," he said quietly to Elise. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "No. But it's another step. Every victory chips away at their foundation." In the citadel of the Union of Superior Species, the destruction of the relay station sent shockwaves through the Council. Grand Arbiter Valoran stood in the chamber, his voice calm but resolute. The humans are no longer an isolated anomaly. They are a spark igniting rebellion across the galaxy. This cannot continue. "What do you propose?" asked Counselor Elise. Valoran's gaze darkened. "We show them the consequences of defiance. We will make them an example." As the council debated, a shadowy figure slipped into the room, a USS operative with information that would change everything. "We've tracked them," the operative said. "The humans and their allies. We know where they're hiding." Valoran's lips curled into a cold smile. "Then it's time to end this." The Vanguard's Edge floated silently in a remote nebula, its systems powered down to avoid detection. Inside, the crew's tension was palpable. After the destruction of the comms relay, their victory had been short-lived. USS retaliation was imminent, and the galaxy felt smaller with every passing moment. In the war room, Captain Elise Marlowe convened her senior crew. Holographic displays of star systems glimmered above the central table, each marked with USS activity. "We've made our mark," Elise began, her tone calm but steely. "But the USS is regrouping. They won't let us strike again without consequence." Daniel Carter stood at the edge of the room, his arms crossed. "They'll come for us directly. This time, they won't hold back." Elise nodded. "That's why we need to be ready." "Kieran, how's the ship's arsenal?" The Ichtery weapons officer grinned, his sharp teeth glinting. "Locked and loaded. If they want a fight, we'll give them one." Nadia, the Zelker engineer, interjected, her voice laced with worry. "Our cloaking systems are holding, but if they track us, we'll be outmatched. We can't win a direct confrontation." Daniel spoke up. "Then we don't fight them head-on. We use their arrogance against them." Back in the citadel of the Union of Superior Species, Grand Arbiter Valoran finalized his plan. The USS had deployed a fleet to track and eliminate the Vanguard's Edge. The council chamber buzzed with anticipation, its members eager to crush the rebellion. "The humans have proven resourceful," Valoran admitted. "But they remain primitive compared to us. Their defiance will end today." An operative approached, bowing slightly. "The tracker we planted on their shuttle has pinpointed their location. The fleet is mobilizing." Valoran's lips curled into a cold smile. "Good. Ensure no witnesses survive." On board the Vanguard's Edge, Daniel and Elise devised their counterattack. Using intelligence gathered from previous missions, they mapped out a trap, a location where they could turn the USS's strength into a liability. "We'll lure them to the Epsilon Rift," Daniel explained, pointing to a jagged region of space marked by volatile gravitational anomalies. "Their ships won't be able to maneuver as effectively in that environment." Elise nodded. "And with their comms still disrupted, they won't be able to call for reinforcements." Kieran thumped the table with his clawed hand. It's risky, but it's our best shot. Nadia added, we'll need precise timing to navigate the rift. If anything goes wrong. Daniel finished her thought. We won't get another chance. The Vanguard's Edge jumped to the edge of the Epsilon Rift, its crew steeling themselves for the coming battle. As predicted, the USS fleet arrived shortly after, 3 massive warships flanked by squadrons of fighters. Daniel stood on the bridge, his heart pounding as he watched the USS ship spread out in formation. Elise issued orders with calm precision, her voice cutting through the tension. Begin Phase 1. Kieran, fire the decoys. Kieran activated the ship's modified torpedoes, each equipped with advanced cloaking tech. The decoys streaked toward the USS fleet, creating false sensor readings that suggested multiple targets. The USS warships fired in response, their weapons tearing through empty space. Phase 2, Elise commanded. Nadia triggered the ship's modified engines, creating an energy signature that mimicked a warp drive failure. The Vanguard's Edge appeared to falter, drifting toward the rift. On board the USS flagship, Admiral Thalvek observed the scene with narrowed eyes. They're trying to flee, he growled. Pursue them into the rift. I want that ship destroyed. As the fleet advanced, the USS ships began to experience the rift's effects. Gravitational anomalies twisted their trajectories, and sensor readings became erratic. The Vanguard's Edge, however, navigated the chaos with practiced precision. Nadia's engineering expertise allowed the ship to exploit the rift's instability, using it as cover while positioning for a counterstrike. Now! Elise shouted. Kieran unleashed a barrage of plasma torpedoes, each one aimed at critical points on the USS warships. The explosions rippled through the fleet, sending debris and fire into the rift. The USS fighters scrambled to respond, but the Vanguard's Edge was already on the move. Using the rift's gravitational anomalies, the ship darted between enemy lines, evading fire and striking with surgical precision. Daniel manned one of the ship's turrets, his adrenaline surging as he took down fighter after fighter. For the first time, he felt like more than just a survivor, he was part of something greater. As the battle raged, the USS flagship struggled to maintain control. Admiral Thalvek barked orders, his confidence eroding with every passing second. Regroup. Focus fire on their engines. But it was too late. The Vanguard's Edge unleashed its final attack, a modified EMP burst that disabled the flagship systems. The massive warship drifted helplessly, its weapons and shields offline. When the dust settled, the Vanguard's Edge emerged from the rift, battered but victorious. The USS fleet lay in ruins, its arrogance shattered. In the ship's common area, the crew gathered to celebrate. Daniel raised a glass, his voice steady but fierce. They thought they could break us. They thought they could control us. But we've proven them wrong, again. The crew cheered, their voices echoing through the ship. In the Citadel, Valoran received the news of the fleet's defeat. His expression darkened as he stared out at the vast expanse of space. The humans are no longer a nuisance, he murmured. They are a threat. And threats must be eliminated. With a wave of his hand, he summoned his advisors. Prepare the Shadow Armada. It's time to remind the galaxy who truly rules these stars. The victory at the Epsilon Rift was only temporary. The USS had lost face, but in the shadows, something darker was forming. The crew of the Vanguard's Edge knew that they hadn't yet won the war, far from it. As they celebrated their hard-earned triumph, Daniel Carter stood on the observation deck, staring out into the vastness of space. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The crew had returned to their hidden base, a derelict asteroid station deep in the uncharted regions of the galaxy. It was a place of refuge, but also a place of preparation. The USS might have been momentarily thrown off balance, but their retaliation would come swiftly. Elise Marlowe gathered the senior officers in the command center to discuss their next move. We've just taken down a small portion of their fleet, she said, her voice low but resolute. But they'll be back with everything they've got. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms folded, his mind racing. If Valoran's sending the Shadow Armada, we're going to need more than tricks and decoys to survive. Nadia, the Zelker engineer, was already running calculations on a nearby console. The Vanguard's Edge is capable of evading most conventional attacks, but with the Shadow Armada's technology, our cloaking and evasive maneuvers won't be enough. Kieran, the Icthari weapons officer, growled in frustration. We've fought tooth and nail to stay alive, only for them to send their biggest fleet after us. They're underestimating us again. It's not underestimating, Daniel said, stepping forward. They've just started taking us seriously. We're going to hit them before they can strike back. Elise studied Daniel for a moment, as if weighing his words. What are you suggesting? I know where they're going next. Their Shadow Armada has a base in the Gorgona system. It's a stronghold where they're preparing their ultimate weapon, the one that could end this rebellion before it even begins. Daniel's voice was sharp, with the conviction of someone who'd seen what they were capable of. If we hit them there, we can cripple their ability to respond. The room fell silent. We'd be attacking a fortress, Elise said slowly. That's a suicide mission. But, she glanced at her crew. It's the only way to guarantee we have the upper hand. Days later, the Vanguard's Edge emerged from hyperspace at the outskirts of the Gorgona system. The system was guarded by the Shadow Armada's warships, but Daniel knew the layout of their defenses. They'd relied too heavily on their advanced technology, their arrogance blinding them to the possibility of a true threat. Prepare for stealth entry, Elise commanded. We can't afford to be spotted. Nadia, make sure the cloaking systems are optimal. The crew worked in tandem, fine-tuning their plan. Kieran monitored the external sensors, while Nadia recalibrated the ship's energy output to minimize detection. As they neared the massive fortress station, the tension was almost unbearable. The Gorgona system was heavily fortified, surrounded by an armada of warships and automated drones. But Daniel knew their weaknesses. The key was to strike fast and hit where it would hurt most. The Vanguard's Edge slipped into the heart of the enemy base unnoticed. Its cloaking technology, enhanced by Nadia's ingenious modifications, allowed the ship to pass undetected as it approached the central reactor of the fortress station. This is it, Daniel muttered. We take out their power supply, and the Shadow Armada falls apart. Elise nodded. The reactor controls are located in the lower levels. Once we disable it, the station will lose power, and the fleet will be stranded. They docked with the station and deployed their infiltrator team. The station's corridors were a maze of metal and glass, its stark, clinical design betraying the arrogance of its creators. The team moved silently, bypassing security systems and neutralizing guards without a sound. Daniel led the way, his mind sharp, recalling every layout, every detail. The crew followed his lead, trusting his knowledge and instincts. They reached the central reactor chamber, but as they prepared to plant the explosives, a cold, metallic voice echoed through the room. Intruders detected. Termination protocols engaged. Before they could react, automated turrets sprang from the walls, their blasters firing at them in rapid succession. Elise drew her sidearm, returning fire, while Kieran shielded the group with his massive frame. Daniel took cover behind a pillar, scanning the room for any weaknesses in the station's defenses. They're adapting faster than we expected, Daniel said, gritting his teeth. We need to disable those turrets, now. Nadia, her mind racing, used the station's control panel to hack into the defense systems. She released an electromagnetic pulse that shut down the turrets, leaving the team a brief window of opportunity. Charges planted, Daniel said, stepping back as Nadia activated the detonator. Let's get out of here. The Vanguard's Edge retreated quickly, just as the station erupted into a brilliant explosion, sending shockwaves through the surrounding fleet. The Shadow Armada's warships, deprived of power and command, drifted aimlessly in space. The remaining fighters were disoriented, unable to coordinate their attacks. As the Vanguard's Edge made its escape, Daniel looked out at the chaos they had caused. The USS fleet was crippled, its most powerful asset rendered useless. "We've done it," Kieran said, a rare smile flashing across his face. Elise allowed herself a small smile. "Not quite yet. But we've made a big dent." Back in the Citadel, Valoran seethed with fury as he watched the destruction unfold. His fleet had been shattered, and his plans derailed. He turned to his advisors, his voice cold and calculated. "The humans think they've won. They've struck a blow to the heart of the Armada." He paused, his expression darkening. "But they have no idea what's coming. We still have the means to finish this." He turned to face the Council, his eyes burning with resolve. "Prepare the final weapon. It's time to remind the galaxy of the true power of the USS." The battle for the galaxy was far from over. The Vanguard's edge had dealt a crippling blow to the USS, but a darker storm was brewing. Daniel Carter and the crew had proved that humans were never weak, that in the face of overwhelming odds, they would fight back. And the USS would soon learn that underestimating humanity was the greatest mistake they could ever make.